At a medieval castle in the center of France, a Sardinian musician plays his reed pipes. Thousands of years ago, nomadic herdsmen from the Near East played their pipes in this manner. I had no idea I'd end up in the middle of France when this project began, but that was just one of the many surprises awaiting me as I readied myself for this journey, a journey of discovery into the world of the bagpipe. Growing up in the middle of the Highland Scottish region of Nova Scotia, I developed a love for the traditional music of the area, especially the sound of the fiddle and the Highland bagpipes. Since their arrival in the mid-1700s, the Scots in eastern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island have managed to maintain their strong cultural identity. Among the most enduring and distinctive traditions is their music and dance, a tradition largely based on the bagpipes. Watching piper John Walsh play his Highland bagpipes one day, it occurred to me what an odd instrument this was. Who, how, and why would anyone have invented such a peculiar instrument? Little did I realize at the time where this curiosity would lead me. Next thing I knew, I was working out the itinerary for our journey. Of course, we'd have to travel to Scotland to film the great Highland bagpipes, and to Ireland for the eland, or elbow pipes, and some real drab Guinness. So with a couple of friends for company and doubling as production crew, our journey begins. So it was that I found myself high above Toronto, reading a remarkable book on the bagpipe by Anthony Baines. It seemed extraordinary to be sailing through the clouds in a Boeing 747, reading about bagpipes that predated Christ's arrival on Earth. Here was the first documented complaint about the bagpipes, written by the great playwright Aristophanes in 862 AD, in which he complained about the waspish, droning sound of the pipers from Thebes. Did you know that the Roman Emperor Nero was an avid piper who played the bagpipes, not the fiddle, when Rome burned? Before I knew it, I was on the ferry approaching the dock at Dunoon, just west of Glasgow. We've come here for the pipe bands, as the Cowal Highland Games is reported to be the most spectacular gathering of pipe bands in the world. We were greeted by typical Scottish weather that morning. However, it didn't deter any of the 150 pipe bands from their traditional march up the long hill to the competition field. Gradually, the weather cleared. I managed to battle my way past the Scottish television crews to talk with Matthew Cowal, chairman of the Royal Scottish Pipe Band Association.
This is our fourth major championship of the year. We have 152 bands enter. We do 64 contests in a year. The format is laid down, so wherever we are, we do the same format. We multiply it by the number of bands, by the number of arenas that we use. We're using 4 arenas here today. At the World Championship, we used 7 arenas, where we had 194 bands competing. Who won this year? This year, Simon Fraser University from Canada won. The second time it's gone out of the country. The other time it also went to Canada with the 78 Fraser Highlanders. And might I say, a very popular choice of winner it was this year. The pipe band was initiated by the military. In the early days of troops marching into war, drummers led them by beating time for them to march. In Scotland, the pipers were then invited to join and become the leaders of the drums, and it became a pipe band. The history of the country, the dukes had their own armies and they all joined together in the crown and they had their own pipers playing for them. So when they came into the regiment, pipers were gathered together and they formed a pipe band. And that's where the Scottish clans and the Scottish regiments all had their own bands, and that's what started it all off.
Earlier on in the day, before the weather cleared, solo pipers and the lower grades of pipe bands competed against the weather as well as their peers.
How do you like the weather we're having?
Rotten! Rubbish!
Will they stay in tune now? If they play them properly, yes.
As if there wasn't enough action with the pipe bands, the Cowal Games is also the site of the Argyll, Scottish, and World Championships of Highland Dancing, the largest conglomeration of Highland dancers in the world. Canadian Highland dancers are among the best in the world. Stephanie Grant, from my hometown in Nova Scotia, is one of the best. Dancing in her highly competitive 15 and under juvenile category, she was the second runner-up. While the judges were tallying up their scores, 150 or more pipe bands paraded in front of the stands, an amazing sight, as band after band marched onto the field. 3,000 pipers and drummers assembled for the grand finale. An astounding spectacle and a wee bit overwhelming for my own camera.
With 100 and a quarter point, the Harry Model Challenge Cup.
After the awarding of prizes, it was time to move on. My destination was Oban, where I would meet a piper friend from home, and our quest would be the Piobaireachd, the mysterious, ancient classical music of the Highland bagpipes. The more familiar sounding Scottish music we hear pipers and pipe bands play is called in Gaelic Cow Beck, the little music or light music, while the pibroch is referred to as Cow Mór, the big music or great music. The highest honor for solo Scottish piping in the world is the gold medal. And since 1875, the Highland Society of London has presented only 2 gold medals a year for Cow Mór, one at Inverness and the other here at Oban. I met up with my piper friend and we managed to arrive the evening before the pibroch competition, just in time for the sunset and a couple of pints of Gillespie's dark ale. Whether it was the music or the ale, as I gazed out over the waters that evening, I found myself slipping into a very contented state, as if I were somehow transported back into ancient Celtic times. I slept well that night, and after a good Scottish breakfast at the Royal Hotel, it was time for the senior pibroch competition, where former winners of the gold medal compete. I was very honored to have been the only cameraman granted permission to film the first competitor of the morning, Dr. Angus MacDonald, winner of the previous year's gold medal at Oban. Later, on the Isle of Skye, I had the opportunity to ask Dr. Angus about this esoteric form of music.
Pibroch was the first music to be played on the pipe. By the end of the 1500s, pipe music was pibroch purely and quite highly developed. Pibroch developed, of course, in a time where clan chieftains were employing bards and clarsach, harp players, and also employing bagpipe players.
This is the monument that was erected to commemorate the MacCrimmons. It's at the site, at least it's estimated to be approximately the site where the MacCrimmon College of Piping was throughout the reign of the Clan MacLeod and Dunvegan. The MacCrimmons were a family of pipers that spanned approximately 10 generations and were foremost in teaching and composing Cowal Mór. They helped, if you like, to develop piping and the art form of pibroch.
Pibroch develops from a simple theme, what we call the uller or ground. From this groundwork, there are variations on the ground or theme. The variations build up to a climax to finish with what the variation called the croon lower, is the crowning movement of the tune. And once that is played, we go back to the ground again, to the theme of the tune. The pipes in Scotland certainly and throughout the world has lost the Gaelic connection apart from pibroch. Once Queen Victoria started coming to Scotland and Walter Scott discovered Scotland and wrote about Scotland, and the English people started coming in, the upper class started wearing the kilt, listening to Gaelic songs in the ballroom and put piano music to it, it had to change.
It's not developing as a music anymore. but it is still has a very strong following in the piping world and a small enthusiastic band of followers out with the piping world.
We're back in Oban for the start of the Argyllshire gathering.
Very dirty.
Once again, events got underway with the traditional march up the hill and the traditional morning rain. Solo piping competitions for the light music continued most of the day, as did the rain. Thank goodness for the beer tents. In the afternoon, the weather finally cleared, and I managed to track down Chief Piping Steward Angus Nichol to ask him about the little music.
Kilbeck consists of what you can hear in the background now, the light music, marches, strathspeys, reels, jigs, hornpipes. There was, one has to remember, a long period from 1746 to 1781 when the playing of the pipe was forbidden. 1781 the pipe came back, or came back rather more, because of course it was played undercover very much during the time of the Disarming Act. Then after that the pipe started to be heard very much more and to take over the fiddle tunes for dancing. If there was no piper or fiddler or whatever, then quite often dancing took place accompanied by people singing. And the singing was types of song known as Cwrstabeil, music from the mouth. So long as the rhythm of the words is good, then it's very danceable and very effective. Pipe bands are modern. Pipe bands only started really with in the middle of the last century, when first of all Highland regiments were allowed to have 2 or 3 pipers. And after that, I think partly the enthusiasm of Queen Victoria and her husband, when he was still alive up to 1861, was probably instrumental in increasing the number of pipers until gradually they got a bit bigger and you got a pipe band of perhaps a dozen or so pipers and 4 or half a dozen drummers. And it's gone on since then. And the idea of a pipe band, which is not a traditional sound, though I suppose you could say there is a new tradition.
It was a beautiful evening, with all the usual activities in the streets and pubs. For me, however, it was a little sad, as daylight would find me moving on. In the morning, as I carried my camera gear down to the lobby of the hotel to check out, an amazing sight awaited me. About to start a fashion shoot, these tartan-clad models were attracting lots of attention.
This is the Independent newspaper. It's fashion. And we're from London.
Sitting on the bus on my way to the airport, I was thinking that somehow these tartaned English models seem to be symbolic of what most tourists see as Scottish culture, an attractive mix of ancient Highland traditions and of Victorian English influences. We've come to Ireland to seek out the younger Celtic brother of the Scottish pipes, the uilleann, or elbow pipes. Although the Irish war pipes date back to the 5th century, they were similar to the Scottish pipes. It wasn't until the latter half of the 18th century that the distinctive Irish pipes were developed. One of Ireland's best pipers, songwriters, and performers is Finbar Fury.
Record. This, first of all, is called a set of Irish uilleann pipes. And uilleann means, or uilleann, it means elbow pipes. And it's about the only instrument we can actually call our own in Ireland, because everything else has been robbed of us. But you have to be born a paddy to play this instrument. And sometimes when I look at it, I think to myself, geez, you have to be born a paddy to want to play this instrument. This part here is my bellows. This is my powerhouse. I get all the power from there. So what you do, you strap yourself in like that, there. And then you plug yourself in down there. You have to be very careful what you're plugging in down there now, I tell you. 3 or 4 pints of Guinness because you could end up singing like Pavarotti for the rest of the night, you know. Wouldn't be too bad if you could take the pain away, you know. Then, I'm getting worse as I go. Then you fill the bag up, this one here, and you put that under your left elbow like that, you know. And that's the 2 elbows taken up. Then you release the drones, these ones. There's 3 of them fellas going there, and you have to keep them going at the same pressure with both elbows at the same time. If you ease off at all, this is what happens. And then after that, you play the chords, regulators, these ones. Then after that, you stamp your left foot to get going. The Germans love that one, you know, when we're playing German. They write it all down, you know, they write 1 left foot getting stamped. Amazing. And then you release the chanter. This is the heartbeat of the pipes. Now, all the reeds, well, there's 4 reeds that look exactly like this one I'm going to show you. I just made this reed a few months ago before we went to Australia on tour. And I picked a cane in a place called Cadiz in Spain. And I brought it home and built all the reeds. So you have to make them all yourself, and it takes a long time to put them together. And there's 7 reeds altogether in the pipes. There's 3 in the drones, 3 in the regulators, and 1 in the chanter. I'm going to play this piece of music now, what this instrument is really made for. And it's called Cowal, and it's a wonderful piece of music.
Having had a quick taste of some of the spectacular sights in and around County Clare, the Cliffs of Moher, the Aran Isles, and the Barron Peninsula, I make haste to a pub session and a taste of the real stuff. Whether the Irish planned it this way or it just evolved, the Elan pipes are a very social instrument. It blends in well with fiddles, flutes, and tin whistles.
Hi to all those people over there in Canada. This is Ireland. We're having a good time.
This pub in a little country town in Donegal is the typical natural habitat of the Irish pipes, as Pat Broderick and friends go to it at a regular Friday night session. In the early 1960s, this instrument was in danger of extinction. That prompted a grassroots organization of pipers, the Society of Elan Pipers, dedicated to the preservation of the Irish piping tradition and music. Through their work, and with a resurgence in the popularity of traditional Celtic music and groups like the Chieftains, the Irish pipes continue to flourish. It was a dandy session, and the next day, we returned to County Clare in search of pipe maker and musician Eugene Lamb. Through various leads in pubs where he's been known to play, we finally located him and agreed to meet the next morning at his workshop in Fenor. After showing us around his workshop, he talked about what makes the Irish pipes different from other bagpipes.
The first Elan pipes appeared in the late 1700s. So they were probably the electric guitar of the 18th century. The old guys were probably saying to their sons and daughters, don't be playing those things, why don't you play the harp? The three main differences between these and the Scottish or the war pipes are that these are bellows blown. They also have a chanter, and it's got this little valve on the bottom which enables the piper to close off the supply of air momentarily, increase the pressure in the bag and jump into the second octave. This isn't me, it's the... That's a noisy clack valve. Most bagpipes, when they're open, it's just music is on all the time. But with ours, we can play staccato playing, which sounds like this. The bag is full of air now. If I turn on this switch here, it switches on these three pipes here. They're called drones, which have the single reeds in them. 1, 2, and the third one is a big long one. It's 4 feet long. It goes around the curve. And they sound like that. And they're usually on when the pipe is playing all the time. And then these here are the regulators, and they don't give a full range of notes, but they give basic chords. So when the player is playing the melody pipe, if you hit these with your wrist like that, you can play simple chords. Like that would be a chord of G, that would be a chord of D. So,
Well, thank you very much.
I must go. You want to make a cup of tea for us or anything?
With a newly acquired copy of Eugene's tape, A Trip to Fenor playing on the rented car tape deck, we headed off in a roundabout way through Waterford towards the Dublin airport. The weather was great, and we were in no rush. Our last stop in Ireland was deep in the Wicklow Mountains, the Glendalough Valley, a beautiful glen steeped in history, as I was about to find out from these young students.
We go to Brackenstown School. We're all aged 12, 13. It's best known as St. Kevin's Kitchen. And it's founded over 1,000 years ago. And he was a famous saint, and he done many things for many people. We saw the round tower over there. There it is. Where the monks. And the round tower was made to keep the Romans out. And the bell, they had a big bell. The monks used to throw oil on the attackers.
The further along the road, the more there is to see. It was a different sort of road that would lead me to that castle in the center of France. My piper friend from back home was surfing the net one morning when he spotted something he thought would interest me. It was a notice announcing a music festival in the center of France, celebrating the bagpipe, hurdy-gurdy, and the luthiers or makers of these fine instruments. As fortune would have it, the timing was perfect. I managed to extend my trip 1 week, got permission to film, and the next thing I knew, I was in medieval France at the little village of Saint-Chartier for the 20th International Gathering of Luthiers and Maîtres Sonneurs. 5 days of traditional music and dance. The castle at Saint-Chartier provided an impressive backdrop for the festival, and together with much of the music, created a medieval atmosphere for the whole event. It was like a carnival around the luthier stalls, an amazing cacophony of sounds as potential customers tried out instruments and spontaneous jams were happening everywhere. I managed to track down Robert Amieux, a flamboyant member of one of France's most progressive bagpipe groups, Quintet Cornemuse.
Saint-Chartier is something unique. People come here to see the instruments, to play together. They come from all over Europe, America, even China, Japan, India, and they play together, they learn music, they buy tapes, they buy instruments. But it's not only, it's not a fair where you can buy things. You can also, especially, I think it's the festival of the ear. Why am I here in Saint-Chartier? It's a therapy. I'm here because all year long I'm on the road. My actual job is playing the bagpipes. And after a while you get to ask these questions, why am I playing this instrument? And when I come here, I have the confirmation of why I'm doing it. And it helps me live with this beautiful disease, which is piping. The repertoire of the Quintet de Cornemuse is compositions of Monsieur Jean Blanchard, which is a very fine piper, French piper. And it's based on a theory because we found French pipes from the last century, 19th century, and also from the 18th century. And from the different sizes, it appears that those pipes were already playing together in harmony. We have two middle range pipes in G with the drones. The drones is this continuous sound in the bagpipes. In G, which we call 16 pouces, 16 inch. And we have a small musette bichonnet, which is another type of French pipe with a bellows. It's a bellows blown pipe with 3 drones in sharp C. We have a low C instrument, which is called 23 pouces, 23 inches. So we have this harmony And we are able to write music and to create things with improvisation. In the 18th century and in the 19th century, we're almost convinced that the pipers, the French pipers then, when they were leading the dances, they would also at one point improvise. So we have a harmonic sound with pipes in low C, high C, middle G, and improvisation. And this is, you could say that since it is all written nowadays, end of the 20th century, it is new, but at the same time, it is traditional.
At one time, the cornemuse was common throughout France, and for a time, the ornate little musette was very popular with the aristocracy in the French courts. But by the mid-19th century, the bagpipe and hurdy-gurdy had fallen out of favor, relegated to the peasant and beggar class, and had all but disappeared. It was about this time, in this very castle in Saint-Chartier, that the well-known French writer George Sand wrote a novel championing the cause of the cornemuse and hurdy-gurdy of this region of France. Perhaps somewhat influenced by Poland's great composer Chopin, George Sand established an organization of maîtres sonneurs, or master musicians, in order to resurrect these dying musical traditions. Now, 120 years after her death, bagpipes and hurdy-gurdies are an established part of the contemporary music scene.
Here in this actual area where we are, there's at least 150 different types of pipes.
From Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, a bagpipe well he could play and sound, and so withal he led us out of town.
You've got the fingering here and it plays da da dee 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 da 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 dom. But this one is only a pepper mill. Okay. We have more different kinds of bagpipes in France than in the British Islands altogether.
One of the amazing main stage concerts featured a variety of bagpipes from various parts of Europe. It was aptly titled The Swarm of Drones. This description of the concert appeared in the program. A sensitive involvement in the world of the hurdy-gurdy and bagpipe of Europe. We are bringing together some of the most unusual, some of the best soloists and duets of hurdy-gurdies and bagpipes in Europe. And we are celebrating the modal universe and the world of drones of yesterday, of elsewhere, of today, and of the next century. The sound of European bagpipe music and the hurdy-gurdy were so different from what I was used to. When that Sardinian reed pipe player came on stage, I was amazed. As I was filming him, it occurred to me that this was it. Here was the missing link, the origin of the bagpipes. For in order for this musician to maintain continuous sound, he used a technique of circular breathing, in which his cheeks were kept filled with air while inhaling through the nose. Eventually, the cheeks were replaced by a separate goatskin bag, and the first bagpipe created. Exactly where and when the bagpipes were invented is somewhat less clear. Most historians seem to agree that generally they started out somewhere in the regions of Central Asia and North Africa some 3,000 years ago. Through various waves of invaders, bagpipes seem to have infiltrated most cultures of the world. One strand of the French pipes came through Spain up from North Africa and into France in the hands of the Moors. While most feel the Scottish pipes came through a more northerly route, from Scandinavia and Russia. Most of the music here was non-Celtic. A major exception was Ireland's sensational Sharon Shannon and her band.
And I work in Trad magazine, which is a French magazine on traditional music. I think there's a growing interest in traditional music because more and more groups are, we call that fusion, a lot of influence on world music, and there's a lot of groups who are playing, for example, hurdy-gurdy and so on, even if in a rock group. At the moment, there's a lot of people who have been very famous in the 70s, which has been a great movement in traditional music here in France, which are coming back, like Alain Sibel or Gabriel Yacoub from Malicorne, and some of that people are coming back, and it's also, to my mind, a show of the Renaissance.
On our last day at St. Chartier, the weather turned. With the downpour came a welcome change in pace. Meanwhile, undercover, in an abandoned garage in the end of the village, a swarm of drones. More than 400 hurdy-gurdies and bagpipes made up the grand orchestra. They crammed together with their conductor and their music to practice for the grand finale. The amazing sound and sight of all these musicians seemed a fitting way to end our visit to this remarkable event. We leave with words from the events program describing this unusual gathering of musicians, reflecting their passion for the hurdy-gurdy and the bagpipe. They have come together from all over Europe for this unusual event and to play together. For their program, they have chosen traditional tunes from the Berry and Bourbonnais region of central France. The very ones that attracted George Sand's attention and that she defended with passion before her contemporaries. These compositions pay homage to those strolling musicians, fiddlers, and collectors who have transmitted those repertoires to us to preserve for future generations the sound of these instruments.
On behalf of Canada 3000, Captain Chris Minto, and the specially flight cabin crew, I wish to thank you for joining us today. It's our pleasure having you on board, and Canada 3000 looks forward to greeting you once again in the near future.
Our visit to the Old World signals the end to this trip, but not our journey. It was late August as we pulled out of the driveway. With my good friend and neighbor, Ron Cash McDonald, and all my camera gear crammed into a sports car, we headed south. Summer was just starting to wind down in Nova Scotia, so with a warm breeze and the top down, our destination was North Hero, Vermont, for the 11th annual Northumbrian Pipers Convention, reported to be the gathering of alternative pipers in North America. This would be the last leg of my journey, a journey that began one stormy winter's day when I went to interview my daughter's piping instructor for a program on our local cable station. Living just outside of a town that's described as the Highland heart of Nova Scotia, Antigonish, since 1863, has been the home of the oldest continuous Highland games in North America. Pipe major Scott Williams is the author of 4 books of original pipe music. I began the interview by asking if the bagpipes were not just another tourist attraction.
That really is insignificant to the people who are actually playing the pipes. Very few of us think of ourselves as entertainers for the tourists. I'm a piper because I love the pipes, and I'm a teacher of piping because I want to pass that on to other people. We've only been here 200 years, and that's not a long time in the great scheme of things, so we're still very much attached to our roots. And for many of us in eastern Nova Scotia, our roots are in Scotland, so the music, the song, the dance, the language of Scotland is something that we want to hold on to.
Scott's son, Zephaniah, is 8 generations down the line from the original Zephaniah Williams, who first blazed the trail that is now Main Street in Antigonish. He's a senior member of his father's Young Highland Society pipe band. Through his teaching and writing, Scott feels it's important to pass on these traditions.
Oh yes, yeah. It's probably the only thing we have that's ours. Most of the rest of our society is modeled after American society with television and videos and everything else. We've brought American culture into our homes, and the children are adopting that as their own culture. And it's only through piping and dancing and Gaelic singing and fiddling and things like that that we're able to show we are different. We have a different heritage. We have a different way of life and so on, and our music is part of it.
The weather was holding nicely as we made our way towards the U.S. border. It was shortly after my interview with Scott that I visited piper and pipe maker John Walsh in his workshop. A more recent immigrant to Nova Scotia, John was a member of the 78th Fraser Highlanders, the first pipe band outside of Scotland to win the World Championship. Now, besides giving private lessons and adjudicating pipe bands, he is also pipe major of the Grade 1 Halifax Police Pipe Band, as well as running a full-time business making his unique shuttle pipes.
You know, you go to the party and somebody says, bring out your bagpipes, or you haul these things out and you start playing, and before you know where you are, there's only 2 of you left. You and the guy that asked you to play. It takes the place, in my opinion, of a parlour pipe. What it is, it has 2 drones in this cylinder here, and I use practice chanter reeds. They're just regular, off-the-shelf practice chanter reeds, and it's actually tuned with these sliders, moving them up and down. There's a little hole in there, and it makes this hole longer and shorter, just the same as a regular bagpipe. Just a regular, synthetic bag on the inside, and you can put these things down, and 3 weeks later they'll still be in tune. An instrument that would be pleasant to play in the house, pleasant to play with a group because it's also tuned to a proper concert pitch A, and it doesn't deafen everybody.
Simon Fraser University Pipe Band.
Canada's Simon Fraser University Pipe Band winning the World Championships in Scotland 2 years in a row, I asked John Walsh, how do we account for the high quality of piping in North America?
Well, we have gold medal winners in the 78th Fraser, Bill Livingston, very dedicated to music. Out in Vancouver you have Jack Lee, who's gold medal winner, terrific pipe. They're just terrific players, and they have to bring the bands along. They have to have this level of perfection. They have it in their own solo playing, and they play in a band, and they have to have the band to do the same thing. And as a result, I think we work harder at it than to do with Scott.
Crossing the border, we gained an hour, and it seemed like we passed the halfway point. The first bagpipes to appear in the New World were probably in the form of Highland war pipes, and one of the first places they would have been used was here, in Louisbourg, Cape Breton. Looking out to sea from this rugged North Atlantic shoreline, you get the feeling we've stepped back 2.5 centuries. These tall ships might well have been invading British warships bent on taking the fortress Louisbourg. On board, among the New Englanders, would have been a number of conscripted Highlanders. Among the noise and excitement could be heard the skirl of the pipes as the 78th Fraser Highlanders led the attack. The Highlanders' present-day pipe major, Eric Adams.
In the actual capture of Louisbourg and after the siege of 1758, the pipes would be played in battle with the drummers beside them. They would follow the frontline infantry into battle and be playing the whole time of the battle. For a Scottish regiment, the pipes were always important because they not only provided the music to inspire their troops in fighting, but they were also a means of carrying messages to the front line and to the other Highland regiments that were in battle with them. After battle, if there was defeat, then that's when the laments, the famous piping laments, were introduced, and people would for many days after the fall of a particular group, there would be a lament played in memory of the dead. But generally speaking, after victory, the pipes were played, and there would be reveling and all sorts of typical partying of Highlanders at that time, and the pipes certainly would be right in the middle of it all.
Though failing in this attempt, the New England and British troops would eventually sack the fortress, and in the process, create a major restoration project for future generations, as well charted the course of our maritime history and culture. It wasn't long after this battle that the Highland clearances would bring thousands of Highland Scots to eastern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island. So many, in fact, that before long, this would become the center of Highland Gaelic culture in the New World. And along with their milling songs and traditions came their pipers. A modern-day Scottish immigrant himself, John Gibson has spent many years researching information for his book on early Cape Breton pipers.
Once upon a time there was a different culture here, which was related to a language and a way of life and a consciousness which is just now disappearing. But if you do read the old histories, the old genealogies, the place was ripe with pipers. They were, I think, probably from every community that came here, and they did come in a large part in communities. Among the hundreds of pipers who came here were some of the most prominent in Scottish Gaelic society from the time of the Revolutionary War through until the Napoleonic Wars, and after the Napoleonic Wars too, some very prominent Scottish pipers whom every modern piper would recognize immediately. The Mackays of Gairloch, the last McCrimmon, McGillivray from Glenaladale, the last MacArthur piper that was of high repute in Scotland. Those people were all Kilmore players, there's no question. They may also all have been dance music players. It appears at the simple level that their music didn't last beyond the immigrant generation. You find resurgence of interest in the 1870s and 80s here, but in the 20th century, as the language has withered, so the pipers have gone. I think the fiddle has been a more flexible instrument for their expression.
It'd be nice to have an ocean breeze this evening. Stillwater Avenue, Bangor, and Main Street, Fairfield.
The sun was getting low on the horizon as we pulled into this New England town. Throughout the Scottish piping world, there's some spirited argument concerning competition pipers, kitchen pipers, pipe bands, too much military or not enough Gaelic influence, technique, etc. John Walsh.
I grew up, as I say, in England, and I did all my piping through Scotland, and there was only one way to play, and that was, I suppose, the military way, which is very technically correct. Then I moved to Nova Scotia, and then I discovered there's another belief of piping, that the music is taken out of the piping to make way for all the execution, all the doublings and all the correct fingering. That seems to be what I can make out from it. It seemed to be a fiddle style, very short of embellishments, short of work, technically poor, but quite musical. But I still think what we play is quite musical also. And I don't think that 200 years ago, the people that were playing these instruments are maybe capable of playing what we know now. We've changed the music slightly because we've made it more complicated. In some people's mind, the accuracy is too much and the musicality disappears. I don't really believe that. That's only an Englishman speaking.
The piping that came to Nova Scotia in its earliest stages would have been the piping in the hills and in the communities in Scotland where the people came from. And the pibroch and the slow airs, the Gaelic airs and the jigs and so on, that was the music they brought with them. The march, the competition march as we know it today, originated with the army. The army needed to have the pipers play something that the troops could march to. There are people that argue that the pipers who emigrated here in the very early 1800s wouldn't have been exposed to any of that type of music, so the music they brought with them would be truer or closer to what the Highland heritage actually was. Unfortunately, they learned by memory. They didn't read music, so they didn't write music, so they were never written down. Also, the style of piping that they had was different than the military style. So when you had in the First and Second World Wars, and you had Nova Scotia and Canadian pipers in general going overseas to be trained as military pipers, the old way of piping that they had when they went over disappeared. When they came back, they were into the new style and the military training, and that's what they passed on to their students as well. So that style of piping has virtually disappeared in Nova Scotia, and although there's a few people trying to recover it and study it and learn what they can about it, we're just perhaps 50 years too late.
The unusual bagpipe music we're hearing is coming from a kitchen in French Vale, Cape Breton Island, not far from Louisbourg. At 85 years of age and recuperating from triple bypass heart surgery, Alex Curry probably shouldn't be playing the pipes, but just try and stop it. Though not quite up to speed as when he used to play for local dances, Alex's music sounds very different from what we hear today.
Oh, when I first started fighting, I never took a lesson, I never took nothing. I went by my mother's tone music, playing by her mouth, you know, jigging the tune out in words, and then when I got big enough, my father made the first chanter, then after that I made my own chanter. I go down up in the barn, get a straw oat, go down in the field and cut a piece of oats, you know, bit high, and make a reed out of that. You know, the great note is nice if you're a competition piper. You good laugh, that's what they want, eh? Oh, I'd play a tune probably you'd like it because the way I play it. They're not putting that into the heart.
You're getting better with age. Just like that Scotch whiskey there, you know?
Getting better by the minute. They don't play it like that all the time, you know. That's the old style of play. Like my father said in Gaelic, Cowal, Cowal. Don't play for yourself, play for the fella that's dancing.
Seen here, piping for step dancer John Pelrine, Barry Shears has published 2 books of pipe tunes and background information on many of the old community pipers.
And some of the older step dancers in the French Vale area still speak very highly of Alec, who's now 85. So he's a very important link with the old style Cape Breton piper, and it represents an undiluted link to the oral tradition of South Uist of 200 years ago. Most pipers had a different way of playing tunes. Like the McKinnons down in Meat Cove would play a tune substantially different than Alec Curry plays. Angus Campbell Beaton from the Madwood Coal Mines would play slightly different from the McKinnons and from the Currys. There were over 500 pipers killed in the First World War alone, which took a terrible toll because it takes quite a long time to train a piper. Cape Bretoners were almost dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th century with the outbreak of the First World War. And they were told that what they were playing was wrong and that they should, sort of conform and try to fit in with what the Scottish pipers were doing at that time, and a lot of them did. If it wasn't for the military and pipe bands, I doubt if there'd be anybody playing the bagpipes today. Street parades, outdoor concerts, it's really hard to equal the sound of a well set up pipe band with a staccato drum section. There's something that just makes the hair stand up in the back of your neck. I suppose what I'm trying to say, Peter, is that I'd like to get pipers to look at different aspects of playing. There definitely was an older style of playing, and it would be a shame to let that go. Yet they were tradition bearers carrying a torch, if you will, for Nova Scotian musicians today.
Most of the early Scottish settlers to this part of the world arrived here in Pictou. Today, it's a 1-hour ferry ride to Prince Edward Island, where in Summerside can be found the College of Piping and Celtic Performing Arts. Here, at this relatively new school, Director Scott Macaulay employs an ancient system of teaching, similar to how Alex Curry learned from his mother.
Well, the method of teaching Piobaireachd, which I like to employ, is the Cantarac method, which is an oral tradition of singing the Piobaireachd vocables as one would hear the movements being interpreted. And I find that that's the most effective way of communicating the tune, because what it really does is it puts the feeling of the tune across a lot more effectively than would you be able to do with just the practice chanter. Okay, just sounds a little awkward in that phrase. Let's try that phrase again. And ho, shun ho. Much better. Cantarac really is the foundation of how Piobaireachd was taught years and years ago. Cantarac predates staff notation, and it was the method by which a teacher would teach a pupil through this singing, this oral chanting method. When the staff notation came into being, the teacher was able to use the written score as a teaching aid, but I think that most students seem to learn a lot more readily when they've got that oral tradition which accompanies the written score these days. Okay, now, what you've got to think about is each of those last 4 theme notes are progressively longer. Hey, starting on the F. Hey, yan, an, he, yan, he, yo. Okay, let's try that. Reading and writing and teaching note values and timing and rhythm is a very, very important part. We have a very academic approach to learning here. But even in teaching children very basic tunes in the College of Piping tutor, for example, the High Road to Gairlac, I might sing something like this. She and shadow and she. And the reason we use these vocables, shadow, is so that you get a double sound effect to your doubling. Because one of the problems that most young people have, or beginner players have, is in trying to play their doublings so quickly that the double sound effect is not audible. I think that piping worldwide has really experienced a renaissance, a resurgence of interest, and I think that some of the reasons for that are that that with the popularity of Celtic music in general, more and more people are identifying with it, and I think we've gotten back to this acoustic type of music with all of these unplugged albums that have been popular in the last few years, and I think too that it's because this kind of music was rooted in the home, and I think people really are having an appreciation for the traditional values and traditional roots, and getting back to the tradition. Everyone would like to know, I think, where they come from, and certainly this music identifies with that. My people come from the island of Lewis, and I think that there's been a move recently towards changing what the pipe's all about and playing fiddle tunes and other types of tunes on the bagpipe, which might have a more commercial effect, but I think the reason that the bagpipe has stood the test of time is because it is unique, and I think it's the Highland Gaelic influence which keeps it unique.
Halifax, home of the Celtic rock band Rollins Cross and their piper Ian McKinnon.
All day, punch the time clock. We get to play when the work is through. Let's meet, take stock.
song in particular was written by Dave Panting. It succinctly sums up what it is that Rollins Cross is doing, and combining Celtic tradition and instrumentation with rock and roll. The music that we are creating here is coming out that has a very strong Celtic fusion here in the East Coast. This music does not lend itself to fads. This music is very, very firmly rooted.
In the heart is what could be.
Such an unusual instrument. Acoustically, it's such an overwhelming instrument as well. Musically, some of the greatest moments of my career have been performing and competing with Grade 1 bands. There's something, the feeling, the pride, I guess, the symmetry to the music, playing with a Grade 1 band, marching onto the competition field, and you've got 15 pipers playing in unison. It's just extraordinary. I, of course, still have a tremendous respect for the tradition, where it is that I came from. It's a real challenge for any piper who is playing in non-traditional settings to work the pipes in so that they're not abrasive, that they're not standing out uncomfortably from the arrangements of the music. And I like to think that we've evolved our music to the point where it is kind of a seamless fusion.
The bagpipes. I've always had trouble with the bagpipes. What makes it extra troublesome is my genetic lineage. Near as I can figure, I come from a long line of Scottish lowland sheep molesters, so my heart should quiver at the skirl of the pipes. Well, my heart doesn't, but my stomach does. Bagpipes. Someone once described a gentleman as someone who knows how to play the bagpipes, but doesn't. The bagpipes. A great caterwauling curse that's followed me all my life. When I was a kid, there was old Mr. Ritchie down at the bottom of our street. 3 or 4 times a year, Mr. Ritchie would retire to his cellar to commune with the spirits, a couple of Celtic saints named Haig and Haig. After several hours, he would stagger into his yard, his chapped, knobby knees protruding from under a moth-eaten kilt. He would be carrying bagpipes, which he would then attempt to simultaneously strangle and inflate. Mr. Ritchie wasn't a very good bagpiper, or perhaps he was concert quality. That's the thing about bagpipes. Bagpipes. When you think of it, we Scots have a lot to answer for. What have we given the world? Plaid, porridge, haggis, and bagpipes. But on the plus side of the ledger, single malt Scotch and Robbie Burns. Even your tightest-fisted Scot would have to allow that that's not a bad bargain.
North Hero, Vermont, our final destination. We checked into our little cabin and go looking for Alan Jones, a Welshman who's been organizing this gathering for the last 11 years.
We're at the 11th annual North American Northumbrian Pipers Convention in North Hero, Vermont. It's wonderful. People come from all over the piping world to attend this event here. I call this an alternative piping weekend, or a weekend that sort of caters to the lesser known bagpipe. Mostly bellows blown, but it's pipes that are not coming from the same tradition as the Great Highland pipe. We have Northumbrian pipes, the Great Revival with the Scottish lowland pipes, the border pipes, the Scottish small pipes. We have Polish pipes, we have Swedish pipes, we have French pipes, Breton pipes, pipes from many, many different places. We have wonderful uilleann pipes. We have some of the best players of the uilleann pipes in the world here this weekend. Musicians, pipe makers, players, people that just have a passion for the pipes and the music.
What is the difference between a chainsaw and the bagpipes?
The answer being a chainsaw has a greater dynamic range, which, interestingly enough, is basically true.
Originally, the Northumbrian pipe was a secular instrument, and it came through the abbeys and the priories as an instrument for the choirs. Monks in the choirs took their note, first of all, to sing the melody from the chanter, and then the three drones, with the tuning of the three drones, the perfect harmony which went with the melody which they were able to play on the actual chanter itself. These pipes were made by an umbrella maker on Tyneside in England, and he was used to carving ivory for the handles of his parasols, and he then started to produce the Northumbrian small pipe.
On Saturday night we have a traditional folk dance which includes Quebecois music, French Canadian folk music and dancing, Breton folk music and dancing, and Northumbrian pipe music and dancing. And then on Sunday we have workshops in reed making, we have workshops again in playing and making the instruments.
Not going to work at all, so this is encouraging.
And then on Sunday night, the highlight of the weekend is the grand piping concert where les grands maîtres, the grand masters, la crème de la crème, actually play on the main stage here. We have Colin Ross, one of the most important people in the revival of the Scottish small pipe and the Lowland pipe. John Swain making wonderful bagpipes in England now. We have Gordon Mooney, who's one of the most important people in playing and researching the history and the music of this instrument. We have Chris Olmston, one of the greatest living Northumbrian pipers. Paddy Keenan, considered by many to be one of the greatest uilleann pipers in the world, maybe one of the greatest uilleann pipers ever. Paddy's from the travelling piper tradition in Ireland. We have Jerry O'Sullivan, the greatest of the homegrown uilleann pipers in the States. And Jerry's music, Paddy's music will transcend the world and take you to another level.
If this music sounds different to you, it's because this is a Cape Breton fiddle tune that Jerry O'Sullivan picked up from Cape Breton fiddler Jerry Holland. This strathspey may well have started out life as a composition for the harp in the Scottish Highlands, and later transposed for the Highland bagpipes. When immigrant pipers brought it to Cape Breton, it evolved into a fiddle tune. Now it sounds great on the Irish pipes. In typical Cape Breton fashion, Jerry swung into a couple of reels to take us home. When I set out on this journey, I never imagined the fascinating world of music and people I'd find. Arriving home, it seems like we have come full circle.
People don't want to admit that the piping moves them, you know. When you go to these competitions in Scotland, Cowal especially, you have to march down the street at the end of the day. The only way to get down the street is to follow a pipe band, and there's nothing more compelling.